Good morning, everyone. This morning we are about to study, continue studying the Daf Yomi, but before that, since we're getting close to Pesach and we left open the discussion on Pesach, so we need to finish our previous discussion, and since people ask so many questions, I would like to review with you our previous discussion, and then we go further to the subject of Pesach and the subject of the Daf Yomi. The discussion we had last time, we ended up by mentioning the Mishnah. At the beginning of fourth tractate in Psachim, the Mishnah is dealing with different minhagim, different customs when it's come to Passover. To review the idea, first and foremost, we need to go to the prohibition of chametz. And as we said, the chametz is any product name of chitim, meaning either wheat or seorim or barley, which is the prohibition of having anything to do with any 5 species of grain, which is the wheat, the barley, the spelt, the rye, and the oath. These all different category that the minutes that they become leaven, they pass the border of 18 minutes and become leaven, it's forbidden. What type of prohibition? So the Torah tells us there is one prohibition, it's called achila, which is consumption. Chametz is basically forbidden for consumption on Pesach. The Torah used the language positive and negative, which is one, if does that deliberately, it's much serious than someone did it by mistake, inadvertently, it just happened. But in ancient time, it was a special atonement. It's called chatat in ancient time. In our times, it's just the idea that a person needs to repent over that. But that's one prohibition. Another one, it's called hana'ah, which is driving any benefit from the chametz. It's also a biblical prohibition that we're not allowed to have any isur hana'ah, any deriving of chametz. So, for example, feeding an animal or selling to a non-Jew chametz, it's a prohibition in the Torah, biblical prohibition that takes effect, and it's a part of what the Talmud tells us. It's one of the list of the prohibition. There is another very interesting prohibition that applies only in Passover, that it's called bal yera'eh ubal yimatzeh, which is the possession of chametz. Meaning there is also a prohibition to have chametz in one's possession on Pesach. It's a prohibition which have 2 negative commandments. One, the Torah said, "V'lo yira'eh lecha chametz," which shows any chametz shall not be seen in you, and leaven shall not be seen to you all of your border. That's one time. And the other place they said, "Shiv'at yamim seor lo yimatzeh bebatechem," which is for a 7-day period, leaven shall not be found in your homes. So therefore, one does not violate this prohibition unless the chametz is actually his. A full ownership, however, is not required. So it's all kind of rabbinic ideas, all kind of legal liability, if we use our language, for someone else chametz to make one subject to this prohibition. So the whole idea is the Erev Pesach, the eve of Passover, we do something very important, which is a biblical. It's called hashbata, elimination, which is a very strong, repeated several times in the Torah, but it's a very strong statement. It's a positive commandment that one need to eliminate a chametz, and the Torah particularly said, "Ach bayom harishon tashbitu." The first day, it's even stronger. So it's an obligation that the person needs to do, which the Rambam called bitul chametz, which is making a statement after searching the chametz that if is some type of chametz in my possession in any way, and I'm not aware of that, is no longer mine. By making that statement, it's basically you eliminate chametz from your own meats. Now, the Mishnah, the first Mishnah in Psachim, the Mishnah said that all 14 בודקים את החמץ לאור הנר. So in order for us to comprehend the whole idea of the chametz, the Mishnah said that the night of the 14th of Nisan, which this year, when is the night of 14th of Nisan? it's going to be next
Friday.
Friday night.
Yep, Friday night.
So the eve before that, which is Thursday, we bodkim et hametz, we search for hametz by the light of candles. So for sure, that's the preferable way. That's the way it should be. But if it's a hazard issue, the great late Rabbi Auerbach said that you can use flashlight. But anyway, it's preferable because there are all kind of spots that hard to, especially in the ancient time, to reach without the candle. But there's another important statement. There are people who go crazy with Passover. Passover, it's not, the Torah did not ask us to clean the dust in our windows. And the Torah did not ask us to take out the screws from every utensil and clean it. That's not what the Torah asked us. The Torah said that we should annul chametz from our midst. So the Mishnah makes a specific statement and said, כל מקום שאין מכניסים בו חמץ, אין צריך בדיקה. Any place in which chametz is not usually brought does not require searching. So it means that if you look carefully, there are spots, for example, one's attic that you never go in, or the basement. Soon you see an example of basement. Or things like you never get there any time of the year, only for the very rare special occasion. So therefore, you don't need to search for that. If you want to make it a time for cleaning, it's nice. But you don't go like crazy beyond words. One of my rabbis used to say that in the Torah, the whole portion of Passover is attached to the portion of worshipping idol. The Torah said, Elohei masecha lo ta'aseh lach. You should not make a false god upon yourself. So he holds that for some people, it's almost worshipping idols, the way that they do the preparation. Anyway, so the Mishnah goes to the specific. They said, what is the instance that the sages say that 2 rows of wine cellar must be searched? So the Mishnah said, makom shemachnisim bo chametz. It's referred to a place, a type of cellar in which chametz is brought. Meaning again, especially in the ancient time, they have those houses, you go down the basement, you have there, the Talmud later explains that the shames or someone in the house used to go at the middle of the meal to pick up a wine, and he's maybe carry a pita bread while he's doing that. So imagine he's sitting in the dining room, you have many guests, it's a big whatever meal, and you ask someone to go down to pick up a wine, can be shames, can be even a child, and he carry a pita bread. It happened several months earlier. So then what happened is, he maybe left the pita bread over there. So you don't go crazy, you just go the place, that type of cellar that chametz coming called. So here's a machloket. Bet Shammai say shtei shuot al pnei kol hamartef, which is 2 rows over the entire front of the wine cellar must be searched. ובית הלל אומרים שתי שורות החיצוניות שהם the 2 outer rows which are uppermost, which means Bet Hillel in that sense are very lenient. You just go by the spot that maybe someone get in contact. So what we learned so far, in a very simple way in this Mishnah, we are dealing with searching for chametz. Since the Torah have this strong prohibition, so we have also the obligation to search for chametz. But even after searching, the key point we should always remember between rabbinic and biblical, the key point for everything is the hashbata, the elimination, which means that statement a person needs to make, that's the key point. Which means, biblical speaking, that's the key point, that tashbitu, that you annul. So if there's any chametz found during Passover, it's not yours anymore. And it's very important to know. Now, we talk also about minagim. I didn't left it open. I just want to to refresh our previous discussion. Regarding to minagim, we mentioned that there are different minagim in different communities, and whenever is the merger, for example, a merger between, let's say, families. When the man married a woman, it's not always the marriage. It's many times the family has a big time involved with this, and sometimes the family are very different. As we said, in one hand, we are exposed to a tremendous fulfillment of a dream. The prophet Isaiah said that it will be a time that all the Jews who will scatter around the world will gather. But also it presents its own set of problems, which is when you have Sephardim and Ashkenazim, especially when it's come to Passover, you have too many different minhagim. And it can be a serious situation that it's a shalom bayis, it's a fight in a house over something that sounds for us very ridiculous, but it can be over eating matzah ball, or eating kreplach, or eating gefilte fish, or eating rice and beans on Passover. So in search to find out some source of rabbinic responsa dealing with that, you can go, as far as I know, only the 14th century. And I think the reason for that is because up to 14th century, at least the exposure of those problems were not just communities segregated, different locations, so the rabbis were not called upon answering those type of conflict. But it's a famous response by Rabbi Shimon ben Tzemach. He wrote a response, Shelot v'Tshuvot, it's called Tashbetz, as abbreviation of his name. Teshuvot Shimon ben Tzemach, I think, or Tzelik, I think Tzemach. So he wrote in that response of a serious question of husband and wife, with a heavy conflict. It was not just a husband and wife in his community, it was another question of merger of two different communities that have a very different background. Again, some historic background. Why Rabbi Shimon ben Tzemach respond to that? So at that time, according to the history, it was a very big island. As you know, the Mallorca, it's a well-known island. And the Jews left that island and moved to Algeria. Why that happened? It happens because it was a huge persecution against Jews at that time, and they forced out. So it turns that they move out quickly, almost like Egypt, from Mallorca to Algeria. And now you have two different entities, which is the community in Algeria and the community that came from the island of Mallorca, and they merged. And one of the leading rabbis was Tashbetz, Rabbi Shimon ben Tzemach, and he was called upon to answer that question, which is, in which way you go? Should you go by the husband? Should you go by the wife? Etc., etc. So he said, if it was a segregated community within Algeria, then it's not even a question. Every community keeps their own minhagim, and that's fine. But if, especially in a personal level, when you have a husband and wife, you can't go that way. That, as we mentioned last week, like Rabbi Feinstein said, you cannot have two people around one table, that one person eats something, the other person said that that's forbidden. So it's a very general statement. Again, it's not for or against men, and it's not for or against women. It's just the way that he rules. At that time, he said that since the community in Algeria, in that case, was the community of the husband, so we should follow the husband. Now, because she became his wife in that sense, so it's not even a question, and she need to follow her husband. But there are cases the opposite way can be, which is, we mentioned as an example, if an Ashkenazi man marries someone and he moved to a fully, totally Sephardi community. For example, if we move to a heavy populated Sephardi community in Deal, New Jersey, so he basically needs to adopt the new minhagim. The difference is that the husband needs to do, which is called hatarat nedarim. What is hatarat nedarim?
He has to annul his vows that he made for his other minhagim that he...
Oh, annul his vow, not over other minhagim. It's a very good point. Annulling a vow meaning since all of his upbringing up to this point was in Ashkenazic way. So now he needs to go before the Bet Din or rabbis and to take away to annul the previous commitment, because now he entered to a new domain of a new life in that community. So even there is a Talmud statement that said that you can have two Batei Dinim in two communities, and each one of them rule according to their community. But in this case, when you have a merger, especially when it's come to a family, so you have to make one way or another. You cannot have both ways. We mentioned as an example, in America is no such a thing minhag hamakom, the custom of the place. Why? Because we mentioned that only in these countries like Czechoslovakia, 700 years old Prague community, you can say established minhag. But in America, since it's a land of immigrants, so there's no such a thing established minhag. And therefore you have to find some way to compromise. So basically, we follow husbands' minhagim if the whole household is the husband's, but in some cases it can go the other way around. So that's basically the whole idea of this Mishnah, but we always have to separate between biblical law, which we say chametz gamur, to minhagim. Minhagim meaning legumes like kitniyot, which involve rice, beans, all kind of gibrocht, some said krepalach, all kind of things that it's a matzah ashira. It's all kind of ideas that involve with something that it's more tradition or customs, but not biblical law. The biblical law, it's, yes.
Rabbi, as a lot of your viewers may know, there's a concept in Jewish law that says that you have the ability to sell your chametz to a non-Jew for a temporary period of time. Technically, that non-Jew owns that, and you are relieved of the liability of having that chametz in your possession. Now, if you are a Ashkenazic Jew, that would mean that you can't have rice, you can't have legumes, along with what is traditionally defined as chametz. Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
Okay, it's a good point. Thank you. Let's go and clarify the whole idea of selling chametz. Point of departure. Let's divide it between chametz, ta'arovet chametz, mixing with chametz, and something that is called kitniyot, a legume. Chametz, it's anything that involved with the 5 species of grain we mentioned earlier, that puff up with water after 18 minutes. That's called chametz. That's prohibited. Ta'arovet chametz, which is something that contains grain indirectly. For example, you're taking a supplement food, and that company provides some grain within their ingredients. For example, you have something that involved in a small measure of grain within the product. Since it's still involved with chametz, even a small amount, it's considering chametz. So anything, not only whiskey or beer or something that contains yeast, but something that even small part, there is another category which is called kitniyot. Originally speaking, the Talmud tells us in the Talmud Pesachim about the great Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, who come up with a very important concept, which is start having boundaries on Pesach. What is those boundaries? People can mix the whole idea of rice and beans and real wheat and grain. The more you involve with the agricultural revolution, the more you involve with not knowing the process of making this product, the more ignorant you are, and therefore you can mix between the two. Hypothetically speaking, a person can walk in a very religious man's house. Imagine you walk in the rabbi's house and you see people eating rice. So you may think, oh, look, the rice is puffed up, so I can eat bread too, it's also puffed up. What is the difference? So because of that, the rabbis put the boundaries. And they said that this dochan and all kind of different form of kitniyot, legumes, shouldn't be eaten. Sfaradim, disagree with that. When that took place, which go closer to our times later, the Sephardim said, first and foremost, people are aware, people are familiar. Many people in the Sephardi community makes those different rice and beans and things in their own yard. So they were not going to mix between barley, wheat, and oat and rice and beans. So the Sephardic rabbi never accepted that. Within Ashkenazi community, if you read carefully the history, at the 16th, 17th, 18th century, it was within the Ashkenazi community a machlokot, a disputation within the rabbis. Go one extreme to another. You go to those relatively few Ashkenazi rabbis that said you shouldn't worry about it, and we should not put these rules of kitniot upon public, it's too much. To the middle point that said, the majority of the rabbis that said, we sell chametz and we forbid kitniot, and that you put the boundaries and make it clear for people. To the extreme, the other way, that said, even selling chametz, it's not good enough, as long as the non-Jew fully owns it. Now, yes, David.
So, kitniot you can possess, you just can't eat them.
Can you possess?
That's a question. So, like rice and beans, can you have it in your home and not consume it, or do you have to sell it?
The simple answer is,
when you make the declaration, what are you declaring? Just chametz?
Correct.
Or kitniot as well?
Well, it's a good point. The question is, what's the minhag in the household? If the minhag in the household not to eat kitniot, so you include it. But basically, the minute you're selling the chametz and you lock it, and in your household they have the minhag not to eat kitniot, follow Ashkenazim for example, so you put it together with the chametz and that's it. But in general, when he's selling chametz, net chametz, it's applied to chametz. You can include the kitniot, doesn't hurt.
No, yes. The other question, which I'd ask you about, is, for example, something like Manischewitz chicken broth, which doesn't specifically contain chametz, but it's not specifically marked as kosher for Pesach. So, in other words, they hadn't cleaned their machinery prior to Pesach to start making it. Now that's considered as, you should consider that as containing chametz. Is that correct?
Correct.
Even though it normally wouldn't contain chametz,
correct,
just because it wasn't.
I'll go further with that. You should know that one of the big discussion or controversies about cleaning process or self-cleaning of those machines.
Right.
If you see in our modern time, you see many people using a square matzah, while others using round matzah for Passover. So, for sure, you go the Hasidic usually using the round matzah, like all my ancestors. And in my parents' house, there is no such a thing, square matzah. Many rabbis hold that the square matzah, the mehadrin square matzah, the process that the machine clean and everything, it's much higher in the level of restrictions than hands matzah. And therefore that matzah is better as far as the kashrut is concerned. Other rabbis argue and say the hand matzah, it's made with a hardened declaration while they make it. And that cannot substitute. So you have some people like compromise the first night they're using hand matzah, the rest of the week they're using square, lemehadrin matzah. But honestly speaking, nowadays, 2012, you can say that those companies, especially in Israel, that they have these sophisticated self-cleaning machines, and you have the human, the mashgichim, that go over all the process and changing all these filters and other product of those long line of machines, the level of kashrut of square mehadrin matzah is higher than the hand matzah by any means. Now, back to our question about selling it. So we mentioned earlier that different level of selling. Even you go to a local community in Baltimore, you see the rabbi like Shechatovitz, that he has several pages of all the specifics. In other words, he wants you, when you're selling the chametz, to write down the list of products. Where are they located? And all the specifics. And fully sign that contract and understand what's involved. And some rabbis even require you to leave the key for that room, so the non-Jew can walk in at any time. Now, what's the deal? The deal, in our simple language, I try to simplify, is let's trace a scenario. You have a basement that have many cases of whiskey, and it's worth $800. The whole idea of selling chametz starts 16th century in real action, by the sense that the rabbis felt compassion for all those people in the manufacturing of huge companies, huge corporations, that they stuck with all these products, and sometimes they get close to bankruptcy if they just throw it away. That was the idea of basically selling the chametz. But it's a very sensitive issue, because what happened is, in reality, those rabbis hold that the non-Jew gives you down payment, let's say $1,000 down payment, and you make an agreement with him that the rest of the money he needs to come back. Let's say if it's a $800 whiskey's product, the rest of the money needs to come up to the end of Passover. If he's not come with the rest of the money up to the end of Passover, then the deal is annulled. You're required to return the $100, and he'll bring you back the key or whatever the contract, and everything is annulled. Now here is the integrate and arguments within the rabbinic world. So to make it very simple, the first stage is a person should get rid of the chametz, period. The only idea of selling, it's by force of circumstance, in order not to make a tremendous waste of product, because you can give it to a non-Jew before Passover and that's it. But if it's very expensive, let's say that $800 involved here, or who knows, maybe millions if it's a big companies, then we don't want people to lose their, the income. So that's the whole idea of selling chametz. Now the big argument among the rabbis is how serious is this sale? Some rabbis argue and said, if the price is way too high, then it's a joke. The non-Jew for sure is not going to buy it, and the whole deal is not serious.
It has to be legitimate.
Excellent. So there are many rabbis who hold that all this selling of chametz has to come through the Beit Din, and has to be fully legitimate, in a sense that the non-Jew understand fully what's involved, the Jew understand fully what's involved, the lists of all the products, etc., and locations, and not just that, they make some type of kinyan, which is they take a product and ask the rabbis ask the person to lift it up, that product, pen or whatever it is, handkerchief, and he said that he gives the rabbi the power of attorney to represent that person, the Beit Din, and the rabbis give the Beit Din the power of attorney to go and represent people. So, in very simple way, you go from the leniency to the strict. The stricter of the stricter said, get rid of that before Passover.
So then the strictest way would be either to throw it out or to
not throwing out. Give it away. If it's
so give it to like a goyish charity or something like
whatever
that.
Whatever it is, if it's a small amount.
Rabbi,
we don't trash food. There are people
so you should try to give it to a non-Jew.
Give it to someone who's in need. If it's a small,
but then you don't have to sell it. You should give it away.
The best idea, let's be honest,
is to give it away and never expect it back.
If you have, let's say, a bottle of whiskey in your possession, or you have a small amount of things, so you give it to a non-Jew,
and don't ever expect it back. That's
no,
permanent.
You give it away.
Yeah, you give it away permanently.
That's the highest. If it's involved with a serious loss in any form, then we go for sale. The only thing the rabbi said is sale should be a sale.
So certainly
Can you sell it and buy it back later on after Passover?
That's the whole idea. The rabbi said the sale is with the intent that if the condition, the buyer not meet the condition, it's going to be back yours.
So an example.
But that's the big argument, that endless argument within the rabbinic.
So like a liquor store owner who obviously has thousands and thousands of dollars worth of chametz,
or companies that manufacture
would
cookies.
obviously have to sell that then, because that's
obviously
really his only
have to
option.
sell it.
Yeah, I mean he's not going to give that away, right?
No, you have to sell it.
Yeah.
But Rabbi, there's a deeper point with what you're talking about, and that is that at what point, this is something that your viewers might be thinking, at what point in the performance of a mitzvah where it causes an undue hardship, because that's really the underlying point here, is if you have the performance of a commandment where a Jew is expected to endure an undue hardship, where it would cause a Jew an undue hardship, at what point can the rabbis, or have the rabbis stepped in to mitigate that hardship and to say, here's a way around it?
Well, it's a very good point. The idea is that one is a tremendous loss involved here, or potential of loss. So you do that.
But we do see that in other sorts of commandments. For example, Shabbos is sacrosanct. However, even on Shabbos, if the performance of the keeping Shabbos will cause potentially a loss of life or something, then Shabbos is secondary. So it's
not Shabbos secondary, is the saving life
supersedes it. So it seems as if there is a concept, a fundamental concept in Judaism which says, yes, you have these commandments. They are critically important for you to fulfill. However, there are certain circumstances where the rabbis will take a second look and will say, under these circumstances, there is a way around trying to...
And the minute the rabbis does that, you have a big argument within the rabbinic world.
It would seem to me that when the times when Jews were living in relatively isolated communities, there would be less of a reason to have to go through the process of selling chametz. I think it has a lot to do with as we became more assimilated into other communities, and then now all of a sudden I'm a retail owner who has a whole bunch of whiskey, you know, that...
Integrated with different communities.
That's integrated, not assimilated more, and it seems that, you know, that kind of has caused a need to be able to sell it.
One of the reasons the Talmud said in Psachim, page 6, they said that it's Shema Yimtza Gluska Yefeifiyad. It's a sudden situation. You come back from a trip at the middle of Passover, you're very hungry, you open your closet and boom, there is something there, and you start eating, you're violating a list of commandments on Passover. So that's the whole idea. Lacking it, put a big sign that it's chametz, it's sell for Passover, and that's it. What we have basically is we have this form, we fill up the form, we fill up the items, and that's it. But in a general term, we give it to the bet din. The rabbi said that full chametz, something that is absolute chametz, it should be locked up, it should be, you try to get rid of that, but it's only if it's involved in a heavy loss, then you should sell it.
Right.
But selling it, many rabbis argue that if the sale is not a serious sale, it's meaningless. So they say. Now there's another phase with that is, what happened to a Jew that owned, for example, a store and he didn't sell his chametz?
Right.
So let's say if you go to a grocery store that's owned by a Jew who is a secular Jew,
mm-hmm.
and now it's week after Passover, and he's selling there whatever it is, crackers or whatever it is,
mm-hmm.
kosher stuff. Can you buy it? Absolutely
not.
not.
Not for 10 days, right after the...
Not for any time.
Oh, okay.
If he didn't sell,
if he didn't sell, okay. But there's a
himself
minhag to
not allowed to drive benefit from that.
But then there's a minhag also not to buy from a Jewish store owner for 10 days after.
The minhag is not that. The minhag is the stricter way,
mm-hmm.
which is, since there is a lot of issue of selling the chametz, there are people who are careful to get product that
came in after Pesach.
Not just came in, that the flour, that the wheat
mm-hmm.
was grind and did all the process after Pesach.
Right.
Because there are some people who even product that was sold in Passover, since the sale it's a questionable all the time, there are people who are very strict, who are uncomfortable with the process of the sale, and therefore they try not to eat something that is called chametz she'avar alav Pesach. Even clear chametz she'avar alav Pesach, also by now you cannot involve it. But if you sell it and the sale is not serious sales, there are people who are not comfortable with dealing with that.
Now, is it a sort of a personal thing? Like if you know that like 7 Mile Market does a wonderful job of selling and cleaning chametz and everything like that. I mean, is it something you would personally then say, okay, they're fine to go to after?
Yes, they are fine to go to after Passover, yes.
And for those who aren't from Baltimore, 7 Mile Market is one of the largest kosher grocery stores in the United States.
Correct. Is everybody with me? Go further to brachas? Okay, so let's go to brachas. Now we're going to some, we have 2 or 3 minutes left, so let's go a little bit here in the brachas. So we said here, the Gemara said that when it's come to the name, Omar Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. So here is a big discussion over the names. We have in the book of Genesis names. And one of the questions is how you name a child. Who is naming the child? The father, the mother, both? or how the naming involves. So it's very mind-boggling, because if you look at the Torah, you see some places that the wife named the child, some spots that the husband named the child, and sometimes you see both name the child. So they use here names. They said Reuven. Take, for example, the first son of Leah and Yaakov. Amar Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar said, Amra Leah. By naming him Reuven, Leah is the one who named their child, and she have some type of prophecy. So she said, Re'uma ben bni leben chami. Look carefully and see the difference between my son and my father-in-law, which is Isaac's son Esau. The ilu ben chami afal gav dimdatei zabne limchirutei. In other words, this one is sell his firstborn for money, for soup, for nothing, and he wasn't hold the value what's all involved with the firstborn. So that's several important concepts here. First concept is the whole idea of naming a child. Some rabbis hold the way that the Leah named her children is the expression of frustration. For example, when she said the name Reuven, see it's a son, because Rachel was childless and they have the baby. Shimon, Hashem heard that my husband Snua Anochi, my husband didn't like me, so she named his son Shimon. And then she has the name Levi. Levi, now my husband was going to escort me. And then it was the fourth son, Yehuda, now I thank Hashem. So the rabbi said, some Midrashic said, that you see the behavior of those children accordingly. You see the Reuven mixing later on with the Judaim. You see Shimon and Levi going with the story of the rape of Dinah and behaving in such a harsh way. So some rabbis hold that that's go back in regression to the earliest time of the pregnancy, when their mother was very unhappy wife for the relationship that was in the house. And the fact that she named the babies, and the Torah said, by the way, the reason for naming the babies involved a deep feeling over certain emotional situations, is not just the name of a child, it has an effect on their future behavior in a deep way.
So the father should always be the one that named the child?
It's not such a thing that the wife naming a child or husband naming a child. Every situation is different. There are so many schools of thought. There are those who say that you name a child after someone, you perpetuating the soul, it's continuation of that soul. There are those who feel that she go to a period of the hardship of the pregnancy and everything, she should have name the child. There are some say that the husband should name the child, and there are some say that both. You look at the Torah, you look at the Tanakh, there are endless situations, Vayikra, Vatikra, Vayikreu, so it's in many different ways, and every case is different. Yes?
So is that another way of saying that when somebody's pregnant, the conditions under which they're undergoing the pregnancy, the emotional strife that may happen within the home, can be reflected in the way the child grows up? I mean, they're saying it through the name, but is that just another way
the Midrash relate to that at length, and also the Talmud here involved here at length. They hold the Reuven behavior with later mixing it with the bad, with the Judaim, or Shimon and Levi, the very strong behavior with the killing, the circumcising and killing all the Shechem for raping Dinah and everything. It's a result of and later was selling Joseph. It's selling Joseph the first right. Reuven is the first right versus Joseph the first right, because the beloved is Rachel, and this is the first son versus beloved the Leah, that is the first wife that have a child. And all these family intrigues has a tremendous effect. So in other words, the name, the mother, the frustration, the suffering of the mother during pregnancy, and the name of a child has an effect in many ways in the future behavior. You see how Jacob blessed his sons, and when he's come to Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, has a very strong language, which is again a reflection of all the family dynamics. Yeah. So
it's also true that if you want your children to have certain characteristics, you want to, no matter what the circumstances of the pregnancy are, you can name them. I mean, Chizkiyahu is an example. You can name them, giving them a name which you hope will engender certain characteristics within the child, and that's a very strong tradition within Judaism.
Correct. Very strong. So you can believe that, let's face it, if you think rationally, logically, if the mother, God forbid, let's trace a scenario, if you have someone who's raped, God forbid, and she went through a series of abuse, right, during the pregnancy, then, and if she named the child afterward, and it's for sure it's expression of all this process, most of the professionals will tell you today that the beginning of the development of a child, it starts much earlier than the real breathing time out of the womb. So there is a reflection of the later behavior as an adult by seeing the earliest time of the child. Thank you very much.